Ihahauna Honadiv. Of course, it's time for my annual Samhain video. Now, this video is going to be exploring some of the history and origin of things that we know and things that a lot of people like to claim or say, which is in fact inaccurate. Now, some of these things I've known, some of these things I'm learning more about, and I, of course, like to share. That's half the point of my videos, to talk about stuff that I'm interested in, right? So when it comes to Samhain, today's October 31st, and a lot of people assume that today is Samhain, especially if you're someone who is polytheistic and part of one of the neo-pagan reconstruction movements. Reconstruction because we don't really have what the ancient pagans used to do. We're kind of reconstructing it and doing the best we can off of either archaeological finds, historical stuff, written accounts by other individuals, or just modern folks who pieced it together the best they could and make claims. It's these claims that I want to combat with actual factual history and information, especially because it's easier to find sources today than it used to be back when I started back in the 90s. So, Samhain. First and foremost, let's put Samhain right here on the screen. So you look at this word and you're like, that doesn't look like Samhain, that looks like Samhain. Many of you who have been practicing for quite some time understand that this isn't pronounced the way it's looked. Why? Why does this look different? Why is it not Samhain? That's because it's Gaeilge. Gaeilge is how you say Irish in Irish, as far as I understand. I am not a native Irish speaker, obviously. And I am not fluent in Irish. I have a couple words that I've picked up online by looking up how to pronounce, like typing in the Irish word. And how do you pronounce this? Now, you might have heard people say stuff like, oh, Irish, it's Gaelic. Gaelic is a language group. Gaeilge is a Gaelic language. Gaeilge is specifically to Irish. And if you're an Irish native speaker and you know more about this and I am wrong, by all means, correct me in the comments and give me some references so I can do better next year. With that being said, when you have the M and the H together, it kind of makes a W sound. So that's why you get Samhain, not Samhain or Samhain, it's Samhain. Samhain is actually the Irish word for the month of November. So it's November 1st. Technically, it's the entire month, but it's not today. It's not October 31st. If you are using a Reconstruction neo-pagan calendar, in my personal opinion, if you were to really break it down and to make it equal year-round, if we take stuff like starting in January, there's no holiday. February 1st, yes, some people do Imbolc on February 2nd, is a major Sabbath. Then if you go March 21st is a minor Sabbath. And it goes all the way around the year like that perfectly. No holiday, major, minor, no holiday, major, minor, no, etc. So October would have no holiday, and it's actually November 1st, which would be the major Sabbath, and then December 21st, which would be the minor. So if you want to have your calendar be more equalized, it actually makes more sense for the first for that reason alone. Now, if you want to talk about an antiquity, yeah, they were festivals. It wasn't like a single day event. It was, it could be a couple days, could be a week, etc. So how much do we actually know? And what is today really? What is October 31st? If Samhain's supposed to be on November 1st, then what's today? Well, let's talk about what I said at the very beginning of this video. Ihahauna. Today is Ihahauna, which literally translates from Irish, because again, we're talking about the Irish language here with this particular holiday. Doesn't match with all the holidays that have been added in the reconstructed Wheel of the Year. But with today, Ihahauna, and tomorrow, Samhain, those are both Irish words. Ihahauna just means the eve of Samhain. It's literally what it translates into. I said Ihahauna Huna Div, which means basically Happy Halloween. That's basically what it translates into. It's Happy Eve of Samhain. It's the end of the year. It's the end of the season for summer, and we're getting into winter. It's the transitional period. Now, if we look at different sources, so I'm going to do this cool screen transition after I put up here for you. This is how Ihahauna looks. So if you want to spell it out, if you want to look it up yourself, it's an Irish word. Translates Halloween. And as far as I know, they still say it today in Ireland for people who speak Gaeilge. Anyway, let's do this cool scene transition. Let's talk about some of our sources and some of the claims that are made out there. So to begin with, obviously you've heard a lot of people make the claim that the veil is the thinnest now, and that a lot of the things that we do are in fact pagan in origin. And this is the claim that I really want to talk about. What actual evidence do we have? What's actually pagan? And honestly, what's Christian? Because there's actually more things that are Christian that are done traditionally for Halloween than folks realize. In the 1st century, we have found I'm going to butcher this, but I'll put it up on the screen here, the Kalingi calendar. This was actually found in France. And it was found in France, it looks like, in 1897 or so. And here's a little map. Now, you might be like, what does France have to do with Ireland? Nothing, but it has to do with the Druids. And the Druids were part of numerous Celtic societies. Celtic was a language group. You had Druids in Gaul, which is now modern-day France. That's why this is relevant for this conversation. You had some in Britain. You had some in Ireland. You even had some in Wales. You had, there's a couple regions, and if we look at the greater Celtic world, Celtic language groups for the Celtic tribes, this is some of the areas that they would have been in. Now, in this calendar, you can see this broken pieces here of this calendar, and of course I'll put references and sources below. You can see that we have this particular time period between October and November, which is this word, which a lot of individuals say this is our oldest record and example of having some sort of connection with Samhain, with antiquity, used for some sort of paganistic festival. There is a site I'll share with you as well down below. This was written, of course, by a Christian. This was by Pastor Joseph here. And again, if you see sources and evidence, it's good to read through them and kind of cross-reference them to other sources. Is it possible that this particular source here is leaning towards proof that this is in fact, more Christian oriented? Sure. But that's why you want to compare it to others, but you also want to look at what the claims are, what documents that they're going off of. There's a lot of mentions in this section here where it talks about documentary history of Samhain, and it goes through and it mentions the old stories here. That's specifically where we have built and reconstructed today in modern times what people are claiming are pagan traditions. We also have Samhain in the early folklorists, so we have different people that are writing about it throughout history, what they said about it. This is a lot of the stuff that built and led us up to what we kind of potentially believe today within the neo-pagan community. The other thing I want to point out here is, as we're going through this stuff, and we mention this calendar as being one of the older things that we have available, but we also have these Irish texts. These Irish texts are mentioned, and they were written somewhere between the 8th and 12th century. Now, we need to understand, too, that a lot of the quote-unquote Celtic nations, they converted around 500, roughly. So there was Christianity in here, and it was the Christians that were writing this stuff down. So we don't have early records besides archaeology and guesswork for what was actually practiced. So we have secondhand accounts, or we have people who have passed by word of mouth, because as I've said in multiple videos, when it comes to spirituality, they are cultural based. It is ingrained in the culture, and what people do survives. They might do it for different reasons, but you're going to see echoes of the past. So in essence, when people say, oh, Christianity has pagan DNA, in a way, that's kind of true. Because you have traditions, and if you want to refer to those traditions as pagans or pagan traditions, then yeah, they survive and they live on through the people. But then you could also argue then all neo-paganism has Christian DNA. Because again, the echoes of Christianity, which is what these civilizations have become, is now influencing the way we do stuff today. So here are 3 different sources that mention what we kind of get out of and try to develop into Samhain. But what we know from these texts, these 3 texts are showing us 3 major points, in my opinion. Samhain was, in fact, a major calendar festival. So we know a festival occurred during this time in pre-Christian civilization, based upon these sources. It was seen as a liminal time when the other world was close. So that's that whole veil is thin between the worlds, comes out of these 3 sources as well. And it was associated with 3 specific activities: feasting, assemblies, and supernatural events. That's basically about it. That is the oldest pre-Christian record or talk about pre-Christian practices that we have, as far as I can find, is from these 3 sources here, and that calendar shows there was a time period as well. But that's it. Nothing else that we do today, as far as I can tell, is historically attested to pre-Christian practice. Everything else has been from a Christian influence. Now, there are other archaeological stuff as well, right? There's Terra's Mound of the hostages, and this aligns with sunrise at Samhain and Imbolc, suggesting that there could be ancient ritual significance. But again, this is looking at archaeology and making assumptions, filling in gaps. There's this cave here that might have been associated with some of the folklore with Samhain and the other world. And then there's later folk practices. Again, folk practices survive, and they kind of mix together so much that it's kind of like throwing a whole bunch of ingredients in a pot and making a stew. At a certain point, it's something new, and you don't know what the individual ingredients are if you didn't write them down. And in this case, we don't have them written down, so we just have to make some assumptions. And of course, we have some scholarly sources as well, and certain individuals. Like, one of my favorite historians when it comes to a lot of this stuff is Ronald Hutton. But we have some of these other ones here as well, and they have a general agreement among these scholarly sources. Samhain was almost certainly a pre-Christian seasonal festival among the Celts. So it's kind of universally agreed on that there is something pre-Christian here, and it is seasonal related. It marked the beginning of the dark half of the year, like I was saying. So when we talk about the transition, which a lot of people say that, yes, Samhain today translates into the word November. It is literally for the month, right? It is also basically end of summer, is how some people will say its original meaning was, because it's beginning to get into winter. We're coming into fall. So Samhain was they're doing a festival because they know it's going to get cold, and they're just, trying to stay warm and have some joy before it gets really cold, basically. It may have had ritual or religious aspects, but we cannot specify what those are. So the scholarly sources are agreeing that it could very well have ritual and religious stuff, but we don't know what those were. So again, everything that we're doing today is basically inspired but made up. Much of what is claimed is modern pagan or pop accounts. So people took this stuff, they took them the evidence that was there, and they kind of pieced things together the best they could and came up with their own stuff. So the word, timing, and festival concept of Samhain existed before Christianity. We know this is a fact. It was a major seasonal boundary, likely ritualistically significant, but again, we can't confirm that. But there's no direct description of what pagans did at Samhain from any source. Everything about fire, the dead, and New Year meanings come from later interpretations, folklore continuity, and modern reconstruction. What about all this other stuff that we're doing today? What about the costumes? What about the jack-o'-lantern? What about passing out candy? Christian. So you have heard Halloween actually comes from All Hallows Eve. Yes, that's not Samhain. That's not Ihahauna. All Hallows Eve is a Christian thing. It is the eve before All Saints' Day, which is also November 1st, just like Samhain is. In Europe, there was traditions of going door to door, and even in some of the Celtic. So a lot of people say that the Irish and the Scottish, mostly the Irish, brought Halloween to America. And as far as we can tell, that's pretty much true. All Hallows Eve was brought from there because Ireland is a Catholic Christian country. That doesn't mean everyone in the country is Catholic, but the majority of the individuals that are in Ireland are Catholic. It's considered a Catholic country. With the Catholicism and the way that they practiced it, because Halloween is actually a Catholic holiday, believe it or not, they brought with them certain traditions. So in certain parts of Europe, they would go door to door, they would knock, and they would sing, and they would be gifted what they call soul cakes, which are like these little sweet cakes, which is where we get trick or treat from. And apparently in Ireland, they would sing and sometimes get food. So it's kind of very similar to the whole concept of caroling thing. It would just be go door to door and have, some entertainment and have some food. And that turned into modern day trick or treat. Now, this whole dressing up thing, as far as I can find, we're talking 18th, 19th century in places like Scotland and Ireland and whatnot. People would start dressing up, and you've heard, I'm sure, and if you've not, you're hearing it now, people would dress up to kind of scare the spirits or non-human beings, which of course most Christians would call some form of demon. You would have these non-corporeal beings, ghosts and spookies, that you're trying to scare off by disguising yourself. Probably because of surviving traditions. Because again, we talked about this time period where the other world was close to this world. We do have some accounts attesting to that as being a very high possibility that people genuinely believe that back in the day, pre-Christian. So if that belief survived as folk custom and tradition, a modern custom and tradition, again, 18th, 19th century roughly, people started dressing up to scare those beings that they didn't want to have see them. So when they did their door-to-door singing or interacting or now trick-or-treating, it was to disguise themselves from these things that might mean them harm, to confuse them. That's a modern Christian adaptation of folk customs and traditions. Again, this is a blending of the traditions. So now we have two different types of things that are done. What about the jack-o'-lantern? That actually comes from a Christian story. Apparently this guy named, I believe, Stingy Jack, basically the devil, the Satan of the Bible, the creature who a lot of people just call the devil, trying to steal people's souls. Jack made a deal with him to never die, tricked him, and the way that it worked, apparently he had captured Satan and only agreed to free him if he would never take his soul. So now he gets to live forever. So he was cursed to walk the world forever, could never die. So apparently Satan gave him a coal that's burning, and he put it inside of like a little lantern and carried it around. And he walks around on All Hallows Eve night, basically just wandering through the dark. So the idea of the jack-o'-lantern is to either confuse him or to confuse other people so they don't wander off and follow Jack into the night and disappear. So the whole jack-o'-lantern comes from this devil Christian Jack getting the better hand of the devil type of scenario. Again, Christian in lore. And originally it was turnips that they carved. So they would carve turnips and stuff, and it was basically any sort of gourd or kind of gourd-like fruit. Pumpkins were so much easier. So when it was brought here to America, it turned into pumpkins. So today we carve pumpkins. So yeah, a lot of the stuff that you're doing today is inspired from the past. And a lot of the things that are being done today, if someone's Christian, if you're Christian, you made it this far, great. You learned some things about history. This day, October 31st, Halloween, or Ihahauna, whatever you want to call it, is in fact a Catholic holiday. It is very much rooted in a mix of folklore type of customs and traditions that survived and were mixed and melded and created by Catholics. And if you are some form of a neo-pagan, regardless of what title you call yourself or name or label you use, or if you want to call yourself New Age or polytheistic or whatever the term is you want to use, and you are doing Samhain, I mean, you can do Samhain whenever you want. Now, when I was growing up in the 90s, a lot of the books that I'd got introduced to it from were stuff either on witchcraft or Wicca. Yes, two different things. And eventually, when the Druid stuff became easier to get a hold of, they mention it as well. Like in Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, they also have Samhain as part of their Wheel of the Year festivals, so within modern Druidry as well. And now I'm even seeing a lot of folks that are, I guess, heathen, Norse pagan, also through whatever you want to call it, some of the Scandinavian Reconstruction stuff, some of them are adapting it now too, even though a lot of their original holidays from their sources were from a lunar calendar, and this is a solar calendar dealing with the solstices, basically, and the equinoxes. The Wheel of the Year is around solstices and equinoxes, essentially. So it's more of a solar calendar thing. Regardless of what you're doing or how you're doing it, it's okay to continue to do it for your own purposes. These are cultural traditions that kind of belong to everyone to a degree. Just acknowledge and honor where they come from. Turn it into cultural appreciation versus appropriation. Take it with reverence, understand why you're doing what you're doing, and understand the history, the rich history and lore behind it. That's all I'm trying to do with this video, is to help educate with some of the history and lore behind things. To not just do things, and don't do them to use it and weaponize it against other people. You're really doing a pagan thing. No, they're not. If a Christian is going door to door, dressing in costumes and getting candy and trick-or-treating, they are not doing a pagan thing. If you yourself are some form of pagan and you are trying to honor your ancestors, customs and traditions that have built out and have been reconstructed and interpreted, laying out a plate of food for those who have passed, whether it was recent or not, lighting candles in remembrance of them, bonfire in the backyard and just thinking of your loved ones, getting time together with family, people you care about, eating and drinking, and spending time with family. All of these things are customs that kind of belong to everyone, and you can do them respectfully, and you can do them with purpose. You can do them for your own purposes. So if you're a pagan and you're doing those activities, even if you're doing trick-or-treating or passing out candy, yeah, you can do it in your own view from a pagan perspective, and that's fine. Likewise, though, so can the Christians, considering some of these traditions, either they invented or they kept alive. People converted to Catholicism and they kept the folk customs alive because it was meaningful to people. So embrace them. Just know where they come from and acknowledge them. Anyway, hopefully you learned something in this video. If there's some things that you either didn't know before or learned and are kind of glad you heard about, leave them below in the comments. What are some of your favorite traditions during this time of the year? If you do Samhain, when do you do Samhain? Because a lot of the books that introduced me to it, it was supposed to be midnight of October 31st, which means November 1st. So even when I was first introduced to it back in the 90s, it was still November 1st. But for some reason, people insisted on saying October 31st was Samhain. People later started saying, yeah, it's 2 to 3 days. So how do you celebrate it? If you do Samhain at all, do you do it at midnight on October 31st, technically November 1st? Is it a sundown to sunup tradition for you? Do you do this tradition at all? Have you ever even heard of it before? Did you know how to pronounce it? Is Samhain new for you? Did you always call it Samhain? Have you ever heard of Ihahauna? And if not, is it something you might adapt? Is it now Ihahauna for the eve of Samhain and then Samhain afterwards? Or what are you going to do going forward? Looking forward to reading your comments. And as always, may your path be a fruitful one. And I will catch you in the next one.